if ever there is anyone that I've met in this world that defines the terminology entrepreneur, it's you. But when you put it in context of, say, me, I think I have an entrepreneurial spirit. I've had one startup before, blah, 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 done a bit of consulting, but it is nothing compared to you. I think you just are the epitome of entrepreneur. And I actually, there's something I don't know about you. So I have a question for you, Mitchell. Have you ever had a real job? And when I say real job, I mean a salaried position, because from the moment that the first time I ever met you, you were speaking. In fact, I didn't get to meet you in person, but I saw you presenting at one of the universities, and you were talking about your business. And I think you'd had it for about 15 years by that time. So it was sort of, maybe a decade ago. But have you actually ever had a normal salaried job?
That I didn't create for myself? Whoa, that's a tricky one. I'm not sure if I'm employable. I'm not sure which one comes first. I created the jobs for myself, because I'm unemployable, or, no one
So
employs
good.
me because I'm already employed by myself. That's a really good question. Look, I have worked for myself and I have worked for others, but it's actually really common in Vietnam, where I'm back at the moment, where you see entrepreneurs, having built and they now own a range of businesses that are, completely unrelated. You know how in the West we tend to kind of, focus around a center of excellence, right?
Mm.
Either we kind of a serial entrepreneur, right? Do one business at a time and exit and then do the next. And they're all kind of relatively, usually they're kind of related, right? In the space that we know well and continue to know better and better as you do more of it. But here I notice, not just in Vietnam, but in Asia, there's a lot of entrepreneurs who actually quite open-minded. They apply that same entrepreneurial spirit and capabilities and their vision and leadership and these things that are much more intangible, right? Rather than hard skills in one thing, like, you and I, we've done a lot of tech, so people think we're
Exactly.
tech geeks, right? But actually we're not limited to, I'm currently helping try to transform and grow a company in Vietnam that is in the construction industry.
Okay.
It's nothing to do with tech,
Mm.
and I can see how these other entrepreneurs who've been in this country for many decades end up, being in business in such diverse industries. It is because they apply that most core thing and yet most intangible thing, right? That is that entrepreneurial capability that you highlighted at the start. So I think there's a lot to be said, and there's a lot to chat about, even, in terms of what you mean by entrepreneur and entrepreneurial, right?
Mm.
Because we can apply that quite widely.
It's interesting you say, just on that point, because it's interesting you say, before we actually get the answer of whether you actually have had a real job, when you look at the cultural side, it's really interesting. And the other day for this podcast, I was actually talking to a lawyer, and I have to preface this, I have a pretty poor view on lawyers, which is completely unfair, because I actually have a couple of friends who are lawyers, and they're great people. So from a personal perspective, but from a cost perspective, and just the cost of using legal services, I think is abhorrent. And if we look in, say, the West, when you look at a lot of the lawyers, certainly that I've worked with, they're generally speaking, they're working for a large law firm, or their life is around, building out their career, and et cetera, et cetera. And what I noticed is this guy was from France, and he was saying that actually in France, it's different. When you get your law degree, it's expected that you have entrepreneurial sort of side hustle, and then you have your sort of corporate gig that you do as well. And it's actually part of the journey of becoming a good lawyer. You need those two parts. And I think in the West, there's this perception that there's a sort of right brain, left brain piece around entrepreneurial spirit, right? The entrepreneurial piece is like creative, and it's risk taking, and it's all about, the hustle. And then on the other side is your kind of desire for mitigating risk, permanency, money inflow, working at a role. How do you see that from a cultural perspective in Vietnam? Because you say that it's a, sort of, maybe it's Southeast Asian thing. I don't know, but there's this desire to want to be entrepreneurial. Is that the main mindset, or is there still a big culture of, getting out there and just doing a kind of 9 to 5 work?
It's actually an interesting mix of the two sides. I know many friends of mine who are lawyers or who studied law, who qualify as lawyers in here in Southeast Asia. And they would work, 9 to 5 for a corporate for a number of years to kind of gain the core experience. And very often they would step out and set up, their own law practice to apply, to actually get hands-on and learn about the practice of building a business, which is their own in the industry that they've been trained in, which is the law, right? Which is very, very similar to how when I first finished university and got together with some friends and started the first, tech company that's still going today.
So this is Organ, right? This is
this is the Organ Software Group, yeah,
which is now Code headquartered, Code HQ.
Code HQ.
So when was that? When did you actually start that company?
August 1993. So
wow.
It's been a while, right? And that was, I think, for me, and I can't speak for business partners, but certainly for me, I've always wanted to, because I've come from an entrepreneurial family and I've seen my parents get into business time and again, both parallel and serial businesses. So there's always been that desire to kind of learn about that in a more hands-on manner. And so for me, it made sense, right? We've been trained in IT, we've qualified, we've got a bunch of skills. And let's actually put that to the test in the business context, right? And that was why I got together with a few others and we started our first tech company. And straight away, it hit us hard that we really didn't know anything about business. We know a bunch of things about technology, but didn't know anything about business. That was a really good, in hindsight, through the tough times, you look back and think, oh my God, why did I start a business? And then through the really good times, you think, oh yeah, I'm glad I started a business. But for me, looking back, the most important thing isn't about the highs and lows of business and the economies and things like that you kind of have to face as challenges along the way. The fact that we were having to build our own business from learning from doing, right? But also our business was designed to serve other businesses, because we were B2B, business to business. So all our customers were businesses, and they were banks, insurers, healthcare, finance, transport, logistics businesses. And these were serious and complex businesses. And by developing systems and integrating systems and so on, we were forced to learn about those businesses and their industries and all of the complexities across the ecosystem and all of those things. So for me, that was an amazing way to learn to build our own and to learn about a whole bunch of businesses in highly complex industries. Yeah, so it's been a huge learning journey for me.
Just on that, it's got me thinking that it would be very rare to sit down and talk to a lot of founders and a lot of entrepreneurs, but there's very few people who, I mean, it's almost 30 years, right, since you founded HQ. Would that be
32 years?
32 years. Okay, so it's 32 years. It would be very rare to sit down with someone who has not only founded a business, but is still involved in that particular business and has watched it grow and through the evolution, the macroeconomic cycle, and also catering to businesses, which is a real challenge. I wonder if that is testament to the fact that you are solving a real problem that has given your business longevity. And I wonder sometimes, I want to get to that. I want to ask you, what is the problem that you're actually solving when you founded the business in a moment. But I think that that's actually something that's often missed with businesses now. Capital is probably a lot easier to get. The premise of startup and scale up and, are in the modern technology vernacular, right? But when you were founding in the 90s a technology company, you must have been solving a genuine problem for the company to last 32 years plus. What was that problem?
I would have initially described the problem as businesses just having a real challenge in being able to tap into the skill talent that they need in order to, I guess, in order to develop solutions that will move the business forward, whether or not it's, developing a new digital product to take to market, or implement solutions that will further their digital transformation of a traditional business. There's just so much demand for digital skills. And even back in 1993, even back then, we could see that the demand was always ahead of the supply. Initially, it was just focusing on building a team that operates in New Zealand to support a range of businesses that were our customers. And then over time, that was not enough. The New Zealand talent pool was just simply not enough. And so being able to, go back to my country of origin, being Vietnam, and being able to establish a new operation, integrate that together with the New Zealand businesses that we had built for a number of years, and work through all of the challenges and the teething issues and the very, very different cultures between the two very different countries, just to figure out how it all works so that we could tap into a much more it's not just larger, but much more scalable, talent pool for digital skills. And that was what? That was 2005, right? That was 20 years ago.
So 20 years ago, so you expanded the business. So initially it was in Australasia, and then you expanded it out to Vietnam. I've been to your offices. They're very, very impressive in Ho Chi Minh City, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's very impressive, very big team. So it was, and so what year?
2005.
2005, you extended out the business to effectively be a multinational.
Yes, and all of the complexities that came with that, right? And the idea was quite simple. It was simply to be able to tap into a larger and more scalable pool of digital talent than we could find in New Zealand. And even back then, 2005, already the digital skills in New Zealand was very, very expensive for many businesses. And so being able to leverage the cost difference also was part of the opportunity, to kind of bridge the gap. But more importantly, I think over the course of several years in trying to figure out how to make it all work, because not all of those offshore relationships had previously worked, for other companies who outsourced to other countries and so forth. So we had to kind of go through a journey of several years where we could figure out not just how to make it work, but how to actually de-risk it. Take away the complexity, take away all of those things that a company would have to deal with, so that our customers can just focus on tapping into our resource pool and accelerate their software projects, and keep it really simple, and just deliver. Yeah, so that was quite a journey, very steep learning curve, lots of mistakes, some very, very expensive ones. Yeah, just to kind of make two very, very different cultures work together.
Businesses, so the B2B space, right, and working with businesses is very, very difficult. Would you agree that there is as much about the customer, the business choosing its technology provider, its technology partner one way, there's as much importance in also the technology provider choosing its business that it's going to work with, because you can very quickly, the wheels can come off on these types of relationships between whether it's a consultancy or a technology provider that's catering to a large business, enterprise, or even medium-sized business. And there can be some really challenges around invoicing, around litigation, etc. Do you think that's a big piece for you as, founding effectively a technology company that caters to business, and that you need to be very careful around who you choose as your clients?
Absolutely, in more ways than one. I think there's the usual commercial characteristic of a business that you can work with as a customer, but in order to be able to do what we do successfully, which is developing software, integrating systems, and so on and so on, we also learn about the level of maturity a business has. Just because a company is big doesn't mean it has high maturity
Well said.
in
Well said.
in in how it goes about, implementing technology, how it goes about, managing change, how it goes about upskilling its people, and whether or not, they have well-developed leaders within the business,
Well
who
said.
can lead, the business into new areas of things, right? So often what we do, because it's all very much kind of new innovation. Luckily, I've hardly ever had to work with core legacy technologies that's been around for decades, right? It's almost always developing new things. Of course, having to integrate that and make sure it works with legacy because we work with enterprise customers. But mostly it's all about new innovative spaces. And those spaces challenge large and small businesses alike, right? You know, and so on the one hand, the ideal customers does need to have a level of maturity in terms of, IT technology and innovation, kind of processes. And then at the same time, they also have a certain level of capability to actually drive new things and do new things and bring about change or leading change in their space and all that sort of thing. And it doesn't mean that we can only work with companies that are mature across both of those dimensions, but it means that, we learn to figure out where they're at so that we can adapt, and customize our engagement, our level of engagement,
Yeah.
and bring through, the right level of assistance, to augment what, they already have with what they need to have. And so that took us a number of trials and error to learn, but it's been really good too, because, when you do that, when you have to do that in your customers, you also reflect back upon yourself as a business, right? How mature are we, in how we go about doing business? Um, so yeah, it has been that, as well as, of course, the commercial risk and all of that stuff, right? Are they likely to pay us at the end
Yeah,
of
it's
the
it's
day? Yeah.
it's interesting. I mean, these are really wise words, Mitchell, and I would, really challenge our listeners to take on board what you're saying, because longevity is something that's not often, it's not even held up on a pedestal. It's, when did you exit? How did you exit? How much did you take from the business? I know, having founded one of my own businesses in 2012, I exited way too early. I was way too greedy, and it was very, very premature. And I think that longevity is something that not only does it bring and give wisdom, and you're obviously imparting a lot of that wisdom now, but it also, I think it needs to be held up with much more value. In fact, you've almost come full circle, right? So the last time I saw you in person, it was such a good night. We were in Ho Chi Minh City, right? Had a beautiful dinner thanks to you. It was your birthday, is that right?
Yes, it was. Yes.
I'm not going to say what it is because you look 21, and I honestly I don't know how you manage to de-age when I age every day. But
Ah,
you've
simple. You stop counting at 21. That's the
yeah,
secret.
come on, mate, come on. I've seen your parents; they look great as well. So it's there's obviously got, not only do you keep a healthy lifestyle, but there's something in the genes there. So you're back in Vietnam now. You're working on a number of projects. It's almost full circle for you, right? Because you left Vietnam when you were very young. And tell us a little bit about that story about leaving Vietnam, going to New Zealand, what that was like, and I guess, how you've come full circle being back in Vietnam now.
Sure. However, with your permission, Lee, if you don't mind, I'd like to go back a little bit because you mentioned a few
You
times
don't
this
need my
whole
permission. You don't
long,
need my
long.
permission. This is all about you. You can do whatever you want.
Okay, okay, cool, awesome, awesome. It's just that you triggered some thoughts when you mentioned a few times this whole concept of longevity in business, right? 32 years, this particular group of software companies. Um, I as a founder over the years, my business partners and I, often reflect on when do we exit, right? You know, you exit early quite quickly and you did quite well out of that, and others have done so too. And then we also have friends in other businesses who don't have an exit strategy specifically. They've never been motivated by one. So again, it's kind of there seems to be horses for courses, but also B, there seem to be two very, very valid mindsets that exists at the same time. And I think this comes down to depend on what the business is, what the founder wants to do with it. So for the Algon Software Group, which is now Code HQ, it's been quite interesting how for that business, I've never been motivated by a quick exit or a specific multiplier in mind. It's always been more about how can we continue to remain relevant. So it's not about the growth trajectory, how big do we have to be before it's considered a success. It's a slightly different mindset. It's about how can we continue to be relevant to the market, to as business, industry, technologies continue to change and evolve, right? And as a business, in a service business, in a high tech, high risk industry, how can we continue to remain relevant? And over the 3+ decades, there've been many waves of technology. When I first started business, the internet was not really a thing or a big thing or a common thing. At most, some businesses had emails, and that was it, right? And today, you look at the world today, and then the latest, of course, the latest wave of technology is AI, right? Which we can talk a little bit more in a bit if you like, but through every of those cycles of new emerging technology, we have always been able to find a way to remain relevant to businesses. And I think that place where we remain relevant is where new technologies and businesses that have been around for some time meet, and being able to be a partner who can actually bring new technology and implement in businesses that are not new, that are constantly having to kind of deal with change and transformation and disruption and all of that stuff. How can they continue to, how can new technology enable our customers to remain relevant in their space?
Right. So through your relevant, you're helping your customers stay relevant as well.
Stay relevant and being able to benefit from new technology as opposed to being negatively impacted by change in technology. Technology always changes, right? That's the only constant. The only constant, right? There will be the next thing. There always is. Right now, everyone's kind of obsessed with AI, so that's fine. Let's have a look at how we can make AI. How can we, implement AI to enable businesses to remain relevant? So I think it is because of that mindset. Because sometimes I look at it and think, oh, I should have exited years ago. Like so many entrepreneurs exit, 5 years, 7 years, and they did really well out of it. But I think the passion that my business partner and I have for this particular purpose, it's like every business needs to have a purpose, and once you discover that purpose for that business, then that drives what you want to do with it, and whether or not you need an exit plan or how you exit and all that stuff. Yeah, so I just thought I'd explain that because that's the sort of thing that plays on my mind.
You said to me just before we get to Vietnam as well, you actually said to me, you may or may not remember that when I met your team and we were talking about this very subject around exit, and you actually said that you're a high empathy guy, right? High EQ, high empathy. You have a wonderful team. I've seen how you've treated them. We had a beautiful, we went out in Ho Chi Minh, we went to this most amazing buffet. This is probably like 7 or 8 years ago, right? When I was in Vietnam. And I saw how you treated the team, and we talked about exit. And actually one of your concerns about exit, an exit to say, whether it's, third parties, whether it's a larger conglomerate or what have you, was the welfare and well-being of your team as well. And I know that that's really kept you in the business and making sure that if you're bringing in investment or you're bringing in partners, that the well-being of the team, the welfare of the team is kept right at the top.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that because for the longest time, my business partners and I have always believed that whilst we are in the technology industry and we work with technology, all day long, but we are fundamentally people business. We are a people business. Without the people in our business, we don't have a business, no matter what technology is out there. So I think that is at the heart of the business, our people. And when you look at how other people businesses have exited through M&As, often you see the acquirer will come in and they will either strip the business, which, they get rid of different teams and whatnot, or they strip the customer base, both of which we've spent a lot of time building and nurturing and growing and perfecting. And business, some acquirers, they can only make use of one thing or the other, but not both, right? So that risk is quite high when you're acquired. And that's why over the years, even though we've had several, maybe more actually, approaches and conversations around our business being part of something bigger, we haven't yet connected with another business that's actually on the same level, that's being able to leverage everything and benefit from all of the value that we've created so far into their business in positive ways that doesn't strip away anything. There are opportunities like that around. We haven't specifically been hunting them down, but you're right. It is really important to maintain that in our business.
Very, very interesting. Okay, let's get to the meat in the sandwich, where you are at the moment, and being back in Vietnam. And this is not a loaded question because I do know some of the story, but I think it's such a beautiful story that our listeners would find very valuable. I use this term full circle, right? You're in Vietnam now. You're doing a lot of business there. Left Vietnam when you were very young and left to New Zealand. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that story and how that all came about, and I guess the journey of you as a young man coming to New Zealand, and the process and how you got back to Vietnam now?
Sure. Oh, man.
Small question, right?
How would you like me to?
Well, with your permission, Mitchell.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see how can I condense 42 years.
Yeah.
Into a few sentences. So I was born in Vietnam. My family, I tried to escape Vietnam when I was 8, and then 10, and then when I was 12. First 2 times we failed, were arrested and put in prison, and the third time, I got out, but my parents and my siblings didn't. I ended up in 4 refugee camps in Indonesia for 2 years, and then arrived in New Zealand just before I turned 14. And subsequently, all of my high school education was in New Zealand. My university education was in New Zealand. And of course, I started in 1993 my first tech company in New Zealand with my friends who became business partners, and kind of the rest is history, so to speak. Professionally, personally, it took me about 10 years to adapt. To New Zealand was very, very foreign. Coming from Vietnam, growing up in Vietnam, New Zealand was very foreign. So it took me about 10 years to really settle.
And you arrived and you arrived and you didn't speak English, right?
I spoke a little bit of English. I learned a little bit in the refugee camps, and I started a tiny little bit when I was in Vietnam when I was younger. But yeah, so it was a very steep learning curve, learn about the language, the culture, and it took a long time, to build friendships and so on as well. So I was quite focused. The first 10 years was all very focused on establishing my life and my new roots in New Zealand, and then sponsoring my family to come over,
And what was that process like? Because this would have been in the 80s, right?
Yeah. Look, immigration related processes in the 80s were not human friendly. That was before the days of user experience or customer experience concepts.
Yeah, so good.
So most people just persevere, and so did I. So yeah, it took several years to kind of get through that process, but then my family, my parents decided not to come over, because by then Vietnam had started to change for the better, and they could see the trajectory of the country, and so they actually made the right choice. Even though at the time it didn't feel like that. I was quite disappointed not to reunite with my family for a while. But then all that time in New Zealand, away from my immediate family, in some ways continued to drive me to build a life, New Zealand. And that led to the first, and then the second and the third, businesses, and building out the software group, and really learning a lot about people, culture, and taking on, I took becoming a Kiwi very seriously, because that was that's my new country. That's where I wanted to belong. And then getting into business and growing the business and all of that. But then I started to kind of get an understanding of the technology industry, within which my business was. And I started to get together with other business leaders and started to form industry groups to advance our collective opportunity and agenda and so forth. And kind of roll that forward a number of years. You and I ended up serving on the board of, the New Zealand technology industry. I ended up chairing that, for
Thanks to
7 or
you.
8 years.
Yeah, and thanks to you. Let's be very clear. It's thanks to you, and that also. Sorry to interrupt, but that also comes back to you said something really important about your desire to really embrace New Zealand and embrace being a Kiwi, right? And everything that you've done has been in so many ways very selfless for the technology industry as well. And I think when I came on board at FinTech New Zealand, you were the chairman as well, and you were basically building. Not only had you built a business, but you were now professionalizing the industry and the mechanics around technology businesses as well. It's very impressive, Mitchell.
Oh, thank you, Lee. But that was the work of many, as you recall, right? I was fortunate enough to be elected chair of the tech industry, and then I leveraged that particular, position and the kind of the organization that we were leading, that I was leading, as a platform to then start to build vertical tech industry groups. Starting with FinTech NZ. And that was when you and I, we got together, we worked with others, we established that, and I chaired that initially for several years. And so in that process, we learned a lot, didn't we, about how tech industries actually grow and advance, not just how individual businesses grow and advance. And then from there, it was really interesting to have opportunities to then be appointed to government boards and advising the government on policies and regulations, and how to work together with the tech industry to grow and advance that. It's quite remarkable looking back. Within less than 10 years, I think our tech industry in New Zealand went from being outside of the top 10 to now the top 2 or 3 export out of New Zealand, right? And that no other industries has managed to kind of advance and grow and become relevant to the economy as fast as we did, right? And that was partly your work, and partly, I think today when I look at it, there were probably in the end about 1,000 of us, from across the industry, be it fintech and edtech and agritech and all of those. We took the original fintech model and we replicated that out. And you look at the New Zealand technology industry today and you think, wow, that's pretty amazing. But we had to start from somewhere, right? It wasn't always like that. It's very rewarding to be able to actually be part of that.
Yeah, and just on that, Mitchell, as well. I mean, part of that is, at a macro level, you're actually part of transforming the economy of a country, because you're moving away what is, New Zealand in particular has traditionally been a commodity-based export country, very reliant on milk, dairy, blah, blah, blah. And what you did is moved it to more of a high skill, high service export industry as well. And that's a huge thing for a country to start transitioning more towards those sort of value added exports as well.
Absolutely. I genuinely believe, as you do, that New Zealand does not have a future without weightless export. Everything that is weighed down also carries a carbon footprint as well, right? So which makes it even more important that we grow our weightless export. And also at the same time, I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity to lead the Digital Council, and we helped shape the digital strategy for New Zealand as a whole, so that not only the tech industry was way ahead, but how do we, as a nation, take everyone else along the journey and leave no one behind, with all of the inclusion and trust and everything else that is needed, particularly as the government also wants to, rapidly become a digital nation, modeling against Estonia and other places. So that was a significant opportunity that I'm very grateful for as well. And I learned a lot from how tech and digital actually shapes not just the economy, but through that experience, society, the rest of society.
Mm.
That was pretty cool. I've had a bunch of lucky breaks.
So you're back in Vietnam, and the first time I went to Vietnam was actually in 1999, and it just absolutely blew me away. I had some, very limited expectations, and notwithstanding the people, the culture, the experience that I had, I spent a month traveling from around Da Nang, Hue, Hoi An, obviously down to Ho Chi Minh City. Ratch Gear on the port, and then out to the Phu Quoc in the 90s, and wonderful place.
Nice.
But you're back now. You've obviously will have seen a lot of changes. I noticed the changes. I mean, it's pretty obvious even when you land. For me, there used to be rickshaws and motorbikes, and now there's motorbikes and cars. There's been that sort of rapid evolution, and obviously the cities have changed so much. From your perspective, when you look culturally at Vietnam and also the technology space, you and I have attended a number of events. I think it was maybe 5 years ago, 7 years ago, we attended one of the blockchain events where you could see a burgeoning growth in the youth and embracing Web3 technology. Where do you think Vietnam has grown the most? And what does the future look like for technology in the Vietnamese space?
Sure. I think I'll probably take a step back if I zone into the technology. And actually, I'll share with you something that I find quite special.
Mm.
Um, a really good Kiwi friend of mine, Brooke
Okay.
Taylor, has recently published this book. He's written this
Hold it
book.
a bit more. Hold it a bit more in the middle, mate. A little bit more. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Vietnam, Asia's rising star.
Yes, that's the one. Brooke Taylor is one of the co-authors. He's done a lot of research, and he's been based in this market for nearly 30 years. So really, really in-depth look. Not the usual look of how great Vietnam is and whatnot, but actually looking at how Vietnam has managed to overcome many major challenges, for the last kind of 50 years since the end of the Vietnam War, and in particular in the last 20 years when it's been sustaining, 6-7% GDP growth, right? And then taking that and projected out the trajectory of growth and advancement out into the next kind of 30 years or so, 30 to 50 years, and being able to use places like Taiwan, South Korea, Japan as benchmarks where you could see Vietnam kind of heading in that direction. So that's been a really good book to provide some kind of bring everything together into one cohesive context behind how we look at Vietnam today and where we can see it tomorrow. And so against that it is not surprising for me to see how every business and every industry in Vietnam today, right now, are looking at implementing AI as part of their digital transformation, as part of their business journey. The level of maturity that we can already see, I think you and I have been involved in fintech for many years, and you look at the ecosystem for fintech here in Vietnam, it's highly sophisticated. It's highly cross-cutting across the economy and many layers of technology, but also customer experience and everything else. As you could see how industries mature a lot and much faster than Western counterparts that I've seen. So Vietnam really embraces digital technology and has been able to implement that right across. But also it has a government that is very ambitious, with digital technology. The latest chairman of the Communist Party, who is ultimately the top dog in the country, for the first time in history, he is chairing a committee that oversees how Vietnam implements digital technology for its economy and its society right across the board. And, and he's the one who's also leading the biggest, I think, transformation across the entire government in terms of policy and direction since 1988. Right? So this is very significant. This is happening now since last year. The government wants to push the economy from 7% GDP growth into double-digit GDP growth, right? So they're very deliberate. They're attracting microchip manufacturers and they're upskilling the populations in some of these very key areas of technology, including AI. And then so as part of all of that, that's the context within which you look at the atypical business in Vietnam, right? And you can say, oh yeah, I can see why now they're pushing for AI to come through the business and everything else. So the current business I'm helping with, and the focus or the job is to transform the business, but it completely involves technology and AI as part of that, right? So it's just all part of doing business now. So I think the future of business in Vietnam is digital. Even traditional industries like agriculture and all that, they are embracing agri-tech, and all of that. So the future of business digital. The future for young people, who come out of school and university, again, digital is embedded right through all of the disciplines that they learn. And also the future of the sustainability of Vietnam, its environment and all of that is also very much going to be enabled by data and digital technology and smart mobility, climate tech, and all of those things as well. And there's a lot more doing here than I've seen in other places. There's a lot of talk about this and that and the other, but here in Vietnam, there's a lot of doing that's happening. So it's quite exciting to be part of that. And out of that, what does that mean, right? Well, for businesses in New Zealand or elsewhere, Vietnam is not just an attractive market because it's got 100 million people, consumption appetite and everything else, but its own digital capability is really high, and also it attracts investment. It also has a lot of investors who basically stand behind how the country advances with technology. Yeah, so I think it's quite an exciting time to be here to be part of that. Whether or not it's helping Vietnamese companies or helping international companies, operating in Vietnam. Either way, I think people like yourself and myself, we have skills and experience that that we can really apply to make a difference here.
Hey, I want to kind of link something that you said earlier, Mitchell, which is around your business staying relevant. And then, we look at through the relevance of a technology company, you then keep your customers relevant and then look at what's happening in Vietnam at the moment. And, a very young population, a digitally savvy population and a growing middle class, 100 million. I often draw a parallel to Egypt, which I think it sort of hasn't grown as fast. It's sort of maybe close to 90 million, but there's growing middle class, high digitization, high connectivity, high level of mobile phone adoption. I have a question for you. It's kind of two pronged. One, when you talked about your business staying relevant, we are going through a stage of, it's a revolution, an artificial intelligence revolution. Yeah, it's a catchphrase, and AI has been around since the seas, but compute power, capacity to be able to disrupt, and adoption is on a very high trajectory at the moment. So my question is, firstly, how does your business I'm not going to say as a traditional development company. I'm not going to say that because you've evolved so many times, but how does your company stay relevant? And then can you link that to Vietnam? Where is the risk and reward for the application of AI in the Vietnamese economy? And before I kind of hand over to you, I asked a similar question specifically around the economy to a very high-skilled person from Nigeria recently, and really trying to understand, where are the risks, where are the rewards for AI in Nigeria? And I think from my perspective, in many ways for emerging markets, the risks can outweigh the rewards due to the potential disruption. But I'm keen, I think Vietnam, because it's emerging and it's emerging so fast and it has such a high digital adoption and high digital knowledge, I think that maybe the path is a little bit different. But can you sort of take me through those two questions?
Absolutely. So maybe I'll take it from two different angles. Okay. And I've had this same conversation with a number of business leaders here in Vietnam around how AI will impact not just their business, but their people. So I think the real risk, but at the same time, it is an opportunity for the people, is if their company don't upskill them. That is the biggest fundamental point of risk, I think. AI comes as a wide range of tools that's constantly evolving and advancing. And the tools actually become more and more and more, believe it or not, AI tools are becoming much more smart in terms of being human friendly and easier to use. So AI comes into your business. It can be a very, very powerful enabler that is not about replacing your people. Right? It's about enabling your people to be much more productive and effective, right? Efficient and effective because of these new tools. So the fundamental place sits with upskilling the people in businesses. Thing one. Thing number two, from a software development perspective, because that's kind of operate in that space. Yes, people have spoken about, oh, AI will replace software developers and programmers and so on. But what is really turning out to be is that programmers or developers are becoming, because of AI and through use of AI tools, are becoming even more valuable than they were before. Why? Because now the same developers are much more productive, efficient, and effective, right? Because they are armed with AI. So they actually become more valuable to businesses rather than less, right? And potentially at relatively the same kind of cost, but you get better output, more and better output, right? So actually they're becoming more valuable. And then you've got kind of the recent wave of developers who learn to develop AI. So they learn this development skill to develop AI for their customers in different vertical industries and businesses. And then that's how they are able to bring AI into those businesses and make those businesses relevant. So you can see that at the practical level, AI is actually making software development people, the people involved in software development, are even more important, more impactful, and more relevant to their customers, and who in turn enable those businesses to remain relevant, as AI rolls through, the rest of the world. So that's what I see in front of me.
So if we look at Vietnam, right, and the various skills across all of the demographics, I guess the thing that worries me, and I love the explanation. In fact, that's the first genuine, excellent explanation of the impact on the developer community, because I think you're right. The headlines are all, we don't need developers in a decade, right? And I think the way that you articulated that is perfect, because there's still the enablers, but they're just more productive now through those automation tools. And if we just if we look at automation, obviously AI is a very broad subject, but I always look at it as AI as a tool for automation to do things faster, cheaper, better. Whether that is faster, cheaper, better at the back end, all the way through to faster, cheaper, better for the consumer through predictive, prescriptive analytics, whatever, right? So it's a tool to automate. Now, I think that's all well and good for developers, because you're still going to need the minds, the technical minds to deploy algorithms, to work, data engineers to be able to stream the relevant data, etc. But if I look at other roles, right? So I look at marketing, we talk about lawyers before, and this, I'm going to put my CEO hat on. And when I look at a business, you don't need a marketing team. It's as simple as that. Brand strategy maybe is a little bit different. It's a little bit subtly. There's more kind of soft skills, more empathy, etc. Yeah. But anything that's mathematical in that context, you don't need a marketing team. Maybe you need some pre-sales from a platform provider that you would be integrating into the back end of your business or what have you, but you actually don't need a marketing team. You don't need a copywriter. You don't need you just look at what's happening with the giblification of graphic design at the moment with OpenAI. It's a perfect example. That's overnight. You don't need graphic designers. That if you went and have just graduated from university as a graphic designer, your job is dead. you are no longer required. The same would go in, say, the medical space around what's happening with doctors, what's happening with radiology, and it's effectively making whole swathes of, maybe not the entire industry, but certain swathes of individuals within an industry completely redundant. So my question to you, if you take that premise, if you take that example of graphic designers, you don't need graphic designers anymore. How do you think AI is going to impact the workforce in Vietnam? And you talked about, reskilling, etc. But do you see that there's some specific verticals of danger in Vietnam that are going to be affected the most through artificial intelligence negatively? If not, are there areas positively where you see that there'll be impact?
Good question. I think ultimately there already are a range of areas that will be affected. That what I see in Vietnam is that there's this whole pool of talent that is rapidly adapting to learning new skills. I think that's quite key to understand. So yes, there are some existing skills that very quickly becoming redundant. But I'll use an example to illustrate. And I think maybe if I answer this question in principle, then you can see how it's going to pan out here in Vietnam. So during the GFC, 2008, 2009, I witnessed a number of businesses in Vietnam founding because their customers are in the US or wherever, and lots of business and lots of revenue. And one business in particular, there was about 100 staff, and they closed the door. They shut shop, right? And the most remarkable thing happened was that within several weeks, 50 of those staff have gone into business for themselves,
right?
And they employ the other 50.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So the net effect on the economy is almost zero, right? And they would be doing things that not even related to their job in the company that just closed down, right? So what I witnessed was the industriousness characteristic of the Vietnamese people. But what I also witnessed was their ability to very quickly reskill themselves, right, to whatever is needed to fit whatever niche that they discover that there is room for a new business, a small business, and then they very quickly got into it, started to get it going, and then started to employ some of the people they trust. And that has happened a lot over probably more than 100 years, right? In Vietnam, you look at the history. So I don't think the challenge of AI is gonna stop the Vietnamese people from doing that. Right?
No,
So it's about the ability for the people to actually adapt. Because no one can guarantee that the one job that they do today is going to be relevant forever, right?
And to your point, I mean, Vietnam has enough historical context, to prove their resilience and to prove that they have the capacity to be able to pivot, and as individuals, but also as a country as well. I sometimes worry that there are other countries that don't have the capacity to be able to do that, whether it's from the general culture. I mean, if I look at, say, the UAE as an example, it's the perfect example of a country that had certain assets and opportunities, which, if we think about oil and we think about the, financial services here in the UAE, and what they've done is they've diversified and pivoted because they're looking to the future and they're constantly predicting to stay relevant. And they've done that so incredibly well. And through that, they've built not only this, it's like muscle memory, right? This internal resilience where the country can pivot very quickly through leadership to be able to adapt. With what happened with COVID is a perfect example, by staying open, by staying relevant, and by attracting high net worth individuals, attracting talent, and pivoting to, high value output industries such as Web3 and technology. I think that I would agree with you with Vietnam. I think it's proven that it has the capacity to be able to pivot. But the question is, do more traditional economies, if we think about, say, the UK, Europe, if we think about New Zealand, Australia, do those countries have the capacity to do that? I mean, you're now partially based or fully based in Vietnam?
I'm still doing things back in New Zealand, but I'm definitely spending a lot more time on the ground here in Vietnam. I enjoy seeing my parents more often here as well, and Karen and I, we both feel quite settled, and I've always operated between the two countries anyway. So for me, I don't think about it as a big either or. I still have to go back to New Zealand. Yeah, so for me, I'm pretty much comfortable operating in both countries. But in terms of physical base, I'm now spending more time in Vietnam than in New Zealand.
There's direct flights now, or that's coming. I think there's going to be direct flights.
Yeah, that's coming back again in September, October this year. Vietjet will start flying from Ho Chi Minh City to Auckland.
Well,
so that will make it even
Vietjet.
easier.
They're pretty good. I flew them. They're actually not that bad at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're an LCC, right? Low cost carrier. Yeah.
Yeah, very cost effective. And I think because of the low cost, I think that actually we will see more and more volume of travelers, both business as well as tourism between the two countries, which is quite exciting.
And so I guess my sort of closing question would be, where to from here for Mitchell Pham? I know so much about you, and you've taught me so many things, everything from the, deep tech learnings that I've had working in Web3 with you, also all the way on, how to sleep on an aeroplane when you're jet lagged. I think you managed to master that. But from your perspective, Mitchell, what does the next 10 years look like for you? Are you gonna slow down, retire, or do you have some other business ideas? What's the plan for you?
In some ways, I'm sort of reinventing myself at the moment. This year is the 40th anniversary of my coming to New Zealand, and so spending more time in Vietnam in a way forces me to kind of rethink everything I do, because I'm in a different comfort zone to New Zealand. Sit in New Zealand, you look at the world and you think one way, and you sit in Vietnam, you look at the world and you think
so
different.
So true.
And so even though I just said that I operate quite comfortably between the two countries, which I do, but when you spend more time in one country, it affects how you see the world. And right now, I'm actually really enjoying how Vietnam is kind of surrounding me with everything that's going on and shaping my thinking. And I'm getting a lot of new thinking coming through, and I'm not directly hands-on running the business anymore. I've been involved with other businesses and helping different businesses grow and advance in different capacities. Back in New Zealand, I'm now looking at, well, how can I do something similar here and help businesses here on the one hand, and then also by being on the ground more in Vietnam, chances are I can also help some New Zealand company with having some man on the ground capabilities that they otherwise wouldn't have, right? And that in itself is also another opportunity area to work with businesses that I otherwise wouldn't, if I was still based more in New Zealand. So yeah, I'm just enjoying this phase, and it's opening up my mind, and I'm kind of reinventing a lot of things in my head. And so I can't quite predict what the next 10 year looks like, but I think over the next 5 years, I think Vietnam will actually be a hub of opportunity for people like you and myself, for businesses from New Zealand, but for businesses from around the world, and also for businesses within Vietnam to really expand internationally, as well. So when you look at that over the next 5 to 10 years, I believe there's just going to be a lot more opportunities where we can bring our experience and our energy to make a difference. So I'm not thinking of retiring anytime soon.
I just want to pick up, because I was going to finish up there, but you raised a really interesting point around the location that you're at defines your thinking. And I just want to get your thoughts on that in a moment. You and I, we've traveled a lot together, right? We've done Malaysia, we've done Thailand, we've done Switzerland. I'm sure there's other places, Vietnam, obviously. Yes. And we've presented in different locations. We've worked with different teams. It's been, the last decade working with you, Mitchell, has been fascinating. And, it's thanks to you and how you have brought opportunities to me. It's been very much a one-way street. But if we look at this premise of being in a location that begins to define your way of thinking, because you just hit the nail on the head. That's exactly how I feel every day when I wake up here in the UAE. And I talked to my wife, Zara, about this, how my mindset is completely different when we were in Italy. And my mindset is completely different for the 30 odd years that I lived in New Zealand. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that your environment gives you a completely different, and it's almost like you can flick the switch. If you took me now and I hop on a 5.5 hour flight to Italy and I'm in the mountains within another hour and a half, so 7 hours, I can be in a completely different mindset. Why do you think that is?
Well, a couple of things. Firstly, let me clarify. It's never been one way, my friend. All of the opportunities that I brought you into, I learned very early on in my career that I cannot succeed in anything on my own. It's always be a team of amazing people. Most of them are way better than me, working together to achieve something. So credits to you for those opportunities that we work together on. So in terms of that kind of changing scenery and thinking, there's a saying where it goes, geography is destiny. And it's very true. It's very, very true, right? The location of Singapore, determines its destiny, right? The location of New Zealand determines its destiny in terms of then end up kind of specializing in whatever it needs to do. But the same goes for the mindset, right? So geography determines mindset. And it's because as human beings, right, we are constantly absorbing everything around us. So it's not surprising that when we put ourselves into different environment, we absorb different things, and then that influences our thinking in different ways, right? You are who you mix with, and you are what you eat, and all these different things, right? It's because as human beings, we're constantly absorbing everything all around us, absorbing, consuming, and everything else. And so I think the same thing with different economies, different locations, different climates, we end up responding very quickly. And especially people like you and me, we respond very, very quickly to change, right? We've always been like that, and that's why I think it's quite effective. And if we want to change our mindset, just hop on a plane, and within hours, we start thinking differently. And I would recommend that, for everyone as well. And it's not until you actually do it that you actually feel what that's like, right? It's quite an amazing thing to be able to switch. Yeah, so I think that's as much as I can figure out.